Hey, everybody, and welcome to DE Solutions Lab. I'm Pam Maragliano, Chief Editor for Dental Economics Magazine. And if this is you, today's topic is for you. Do you, at the end of the month, and here we are approaching the end of the year, go to your office manager and say, how are we doing? Like, we don't even know how we're doing because maybe you're having a good month, you feel like you're busy, the money may or may not be coming in. That it really shouldn't be that way. We really should be able to be more predictable and more intentional with our production and our profitability. So tonight, I have Lori Bernardo from Amplify360 to give us a deep dive on how today's top dental practices build predictable profit. Lori, welcome.
Thank you, Pam. I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. Yeah, it's the end of the year, and I think it's time. It's a tough time, right? We're busy with all the holiday and family things, but it really is the time we have to start thinking about what's going to happen next. How do we make next year better? And today, Pam, whether you're running a dental practice for decades or you're just starting to build one, the reality is the same. Today, it's harder than ever to grow your business. And, I entered this business over 35 years ago. It used to be straightforward. And I lived by this guiding principle is that if you deliver excellent care, if you take really great care of your patients, your practice will be successful. You'll keep your schedule full. Your reputation just takes care of your business. But the business as dentistry has changed, right? Now, back in the day when I was just starting out, it was word of mouth really was fantastic, right? But people are not going to their friends and family and asking for the referrals. So that word of mouth, while still powerful, has lost its overarching power, if you will, right? Because people are now going to the internet and they're asking the internet for solutions, right? So it's different now, and we're facing challenges really since 2020. I think is really where the challenges really started to really grow with us and really get in our way. We got rising costs, stiff digital competition, shifting patient expectations. So those traditional approaches, they don't really deliver the way that they did.
No, and we've had pressure since 2020, but here we are heading into 2026.
Mm-hmm.
What pressures are dentists feeling right now?
Yeah, and I think they're not much different, right? But they're intensifying, right? So, that's a great question, and they're not surprising, although I think for some people, maybe their head's in the sand a little bit, because they're just not looking at these things. So these are on the slide here, data points from the ADA. We are looking at number one thing right now is rising overhead. It's all of the things. It's supplies, it's rent, it's labs, and absolutely it's wages, right? But then add that to your insurance reimbursements and the PPO traps. Those are failing. All those reimbursements are failing to keep pace with the inflation, right? You have continued hygienist assistant shortages. And what's really shocking to me, I'm looking at these data points, right? It says 62% report that overhead is increased in the past 12 months. What are the other 38% seeing? I think they're just, I'm sorry, Pam, I can't hear you.
No, I think it's interesting. I don't know how they couldn't be seeing overhead increase. I think everybody's experienced an overhead.
Everybody is. So I think that when they did this survey, a bunch of people are just choosing not to look at the reality. And that's a dangerous place. We'll talk about that. I think today we should really address that. It's important to know what's going on, even if it's painful, right? And the shocking numbers, you say 47% rate finances as good or excellent. That means 53% are not saying that things are good. You think about that. We have a little over 202,000 practicing licensed dentists in this country right now. That's 1 in 4 say they're doing poorly. That's 50,000 of you out there who are admitting that you're doing poorly. That's shocking. Sad, isn't it?
It's actually really sad.
Ah,
I also have to wonder, is it the business model that is, people that are part of a certain business model that are struggling versus, say, fee for service practices or vice versa? There's got to be something to explain this.
yeah, absolutely. I agree. And we're not gonna be able to talk about all that in a short session today. But bottom line is we have to address these top pressures because that's really where it comes. Whether you're a small business, it is a problem with the model, and the big one is going to be your PPOs because it's going to be very hard for us to impact and reduce our overhead. That is outside of the scope of what the average small business owner can do, right? But something has to give. It's interesting, Pam. Last night, my husband and I went. We kind of had a busy day. On the way back from doing some errands, we said, let's just stop at the diner and get a light supper. We had a sandwich. We each had a sandwich and a club soda. The bill was with the tip $52 at a diner.
What?
Yeah. And when you think about that, I get it, right? I understand it. This diner owner, Pete, we know him well. We've been going there for years. Everything that Pete does has gone up. Everything that he bought has gone up. If he wants to keep a certain standard of quality, translate that into our standard of care, the only way he can run his business and make a profit is to raise the prices. And so who's in that restaurant? It's either the people who can, it's really comes down to, it's the consumers that value that experience or that service, can afford, can justify paying the higher prices, right? And I could do that last night. But restaurants can raise their prices. No one stops them. We don't have that situation. Most dental practices are limited, right? They have relationships they're in contract with insurances that limit their fees. And even if they do a fee negotiation, you can't do that by month, right? Because your economic pressures continue to grow. Even if you establish new fees today, in 6 months, you could be behind the 8 ball again, right? Something has got to give. We need to give back control. We need to get back control of our businesses.
Most definitely. I was listening to you tell that story about being in the diner, and I'm thinking, it's amazing that us in dental practices are, you said, what, 62%? Obviously, the rest of them probably didn't answer the question, are experiencing higher overhead costs, yet reimbursements are on the decline, and so that's really frustrating, especially with PPO practices. So let's do a little deeper dive into the PPO story. Why do you think PPO economics are hitting practices so hard?
Yeah, it really is. And I have some data points here. It is absolutely, and we see it, right? Anybody who's paying attention knows that inflation is outpacing your fee schedules, right? So you have that short margin right there. And then the denials and the delays, which you got to believe are on the uptick, right? It's a strategy. It's an insurance strategy. Like send out automatic denials, right? Slow down this process, slow down the cash flow, see who's going to push back. And that slows up your cash flow. Your cash flow is how you pay your team members. It's how you pay for your supplies. If you have to wait for your money, you do the service, you provide the care, and you have to wait 3 months for your money. How do you run a business that way? And then you add that administrative burden. So now you have time and energy, and time is money in a practice. Does your team have enough time to chase that money? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes those overdue bills, those overdue reimbursements just sit there for a long time, right? Your aging reports get longer and longer and longer. And that's dangerous, right? And again, if you're not paying attention, if you're not looking really closely, it very easily slips away. And then, on top of that, the model and what I see, it's interesting, Pam, I talk to dentists all over this country. And I talk to them about growth because that's what we do, right? I help them with their practice growth. And when I ask them what that looks like, it's amazing how many of them tell me Well, they need more new patients. I need more new patients. Well, yeah, you always need more new patients, and we're going to help you do that. But it's not just that. They're stuck in this mindset, the PPO mindset. And because the only way you can stay ahead, unlike my friend Pete, who owns a diner in town, who can raise his prices if people can come or not, he can't. Your dentist, we cannot just raise our prices. And if that doesn't happen, where do we do with that? So what we're doing, we're saying, okay, I'll sign up for another plan because they're going to send me more new patients. And now it's a volume based. Well, all right, that might have been good 20 years ago, but you don't have a hygienist, or you only have one hygienist or a part-time hygienist. Maybe your assistant, you're down to one assistant. You don't have the bandwidth for more. So how do you do that, right? It limits your growth because your growth is focused on small margins, low patient values, right? So patients who are only generating $500 or $600 a year in revenue to your practice. And you have to see lots of people. So what does that end up meaning? You have to just work more, add another day. How do you do that? And have a life?
In many cases, we can't. And
Right.
also it's, I've found, at least in my practice, hygiene drives dentistry. So if you don't have the hygienist and you don't have that constant recall,
Mhm.
dentistry, just getting new patients in the door, you might not be able to, accommodate the new patients that are coming in. So you might be trying to work more, but you might not have it, if you don't have the system set in.
Right.
It's interesting too, though. I think a lot of dentists, they get really frustrated and they're like, they've had enough and they're like, that's it, I'm going to drop this plan. Let's talk about those dentists. What's actually happening inside those practices when they drop these poorly reimbursing PPOs?
Yeah. I love when a dentist gets to that point where they realize that this is the path. And really it's probably the easiest path that we can control in the short term, is to look at what these things do. But I will warn anybody who wants to do that, don't just randomly start dropping plans. You have to be strategic about it. And what we see is that really you can do this very successfully, right? And lots of dentists moving in that direction. And the data is clear, right? The ADA has looked at this data, and much to the chagrin of all these plans, 1 in 4 dentists right now, right? They're planning on dropping at least one PPO. And 1 in 3, which is a larger percentage, right, are considering it, right? They're moving in that direction. So I'll tell you, the interesting thing is the doctors want to do this, right? They said you guys are smart, right? You know what's happening here. You know what holds them back? And guess what holds them back?
I think fear is one of them.
Fear.
And I also think ill preparation. They're just not really sure what's going to happen, and they think patients are all going to run out the door.
They do. And what really helps erode, kind of build that fear a little bit more is often it's the team members, right? They've only known this model. Many people working in practice today have only known this model, and they fear that they're gonna lose their jobs because they're gonna have no business. And so that all kind of goes, you need the team members in. But here's what we know what really happens. When practices decide to walk away, that patient loss is much smaller than everyone expects. In fact, we've been helping practices do this for the last 25 years. And statistically, what we're looking at is anywhere between 10 to 15% on average patient loss. And you know which patients you lose? You lose the patients that are really only coming in for their free cleanings a year. So you're not really losing much. And think about what that could do to your hygiene schedule, right? So now hygiene does drive production, right? They have to come in. They have to come in for a recall. They have to be there every 6 months. You don't have room for them now. So you start losing the patients who really don't value your care. They'll go anywhere for the free cleaning. And now you make room for the people who actually care about their care, their experience, and can move forward, right? So when we do this, we want to make sure the practices start by eliminating the least profitable plans first. And during that transition, make sure that the communications with those loyal patients is very strong, right? Having the right verbiage, preparing people for what's coming, educating them on what that means. You could still come here, you could still use your insurance, and we're happy to process that for you. And having those real conversations with the people that they know really well and support them, right?
Yeah. The other thing is just because they leave doesn't mean they're going to be gone forever. I always say patients are like ex-boyfriends. They always come back eventually.
That's right. You know, it's an intimate relationship, right? When you think about it, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety and all of those things. And when patients have someone they trust and they go someplace else and they don't feel that same connection, it's surprising how many of them do come back. And we do see that all the time, right? So when you do this process, when you start looking at this and you start building your marketing and your marketing starts replacing those patient losses with higher margin cases, right? So one of my favorite real life stories to share is about two doctors we met a few years back. Dr. Sammy and Dr. Joe, they're in Connecticut. They actually have two practice locations. So the doctors, each one kind of went back and forth to the two offices. And between those two locations, they were fairly high performing practice. They were doing 3 million in collections. And, you know, most practice people would say, well, that's pretty good, right? They're coming home, they're collecting 1.5 in each location. But here's the thing. Their write-offs were costing them $1 million annually. So it wasn't just the money, then it was also how they felt about what they did. And they were done, right? Because both Sammy and Dr. Sam and Dr. Joe were highly skilled, right? They took, you know, all the classes, the Penke, the Kois, all of the Spear, all of the things. They were really high level skilled dentists, but their patient base would not move ahead with treatment because their insurance didn't cover it, or they had met their maximum. And they just felt deflated. And they were, you know, been in practice for a lot of years, and they were thinking about, they were done. They were both done. They were going to sell the practice and they were going to get out. Well, the practice wasn't very sellable at that point. And we happened to meet them at a program, and we said, you know, give us 2 years. You're going to sell in New York. Give us 2 years to help you address these insurance frustrations, right? And at the end of the 2 years, you can still retire and sell if you want. But either way, we're going to be in a better position to sell your practice more profitably. So they agreed. They decided to do what we asked, and they were really remarkable in the results. They were highly committed to this process. We normally set the stage for about 18 months to 2 years to be completely fee for service. They did this in 14 months.
Whoa, that's amazing.
Right? And here's the best part. They recovered $1 million in collections. Now, think about that. They didn't add more team members. They didn't open up more days. They actually saw less patients. They started doing the kind of dentistry when they were unshackled from those limitations. And it's hard for patients to understand how this works, right? So when they're no longer participating in their insurance plans, now they come to you and say, oh, I understand my insurance. You're not with my insurance anymore. So if I need an implant and a crown, let's just do it, right? You know, let's work out the finances and do it. And we went back, we said, okay, you know, you've done it, you're ready to sell. And they both said, no way. We are having the time of our lives. It's like starting over again. We're doing the kind of dentistry we love. We're excited to come to work every day. And the whole team, now he did this in 14 months, I want to point out, because the whole team was all in on this. Everybody in the office, they got everybody excited. Everybody was working toward that goal. And And literally, like I said, that's 14 months. This is 2 years later. I think we're like 2 or 3 years out of this process with them, and they have no plans on retiring. They're just having the time of their lives. It's
That's
just really great.
I mean, it sounds like that's, I don't know. I feel like a lot of practices or dentists are listening to this and thinking, that sounds good for them, but like, how do I do that? Like, what would you say the profitable practices are doing differently as we head into 2026? And how can, for those of us who see this and we're like, dare to dream, actually can make it a reality?
Right. Yeah, I love that question, Pam, because honestly, if you're hearing that and thinking, well, there must be something special about what they had that they were able to do this. And I will assure you, they are not any more special than you. The thing that they did was they followed a plan that we set forth in them. And there's really 3 core areas that people work in. And I knew we were gonna talk about this. I prepared this. So here they are, right? It's visibility, alignment, and adaptability. So let's talk about what all these mean, right? So it's any practice owner could do this if they want it. Just like anything else in our life, right? If we want to learn how to do a new hobby, a new skill, you just set your mind to it and you go and you do it, right? So by the way, we just compiled a white paper that has all of this kind of discussion in here, and everybody's on the webinar today. I will send a copy to after the webinar, so you'll have all of this in your inbox. So let's talk first about visibility. What does visibility means, right? The visibility is what transforms, excuse me, the noise, right? I don't know, I'm too busy, I'm not busy enough, I don't have enough hygienists, all these things that are getting in your way, it turns that into insight, right? Now you have to stare down your problems. You can't fix things that you can't see, right? If you can't see what's happening, what's going wrong, there's no way you can make a move. So the profitable practices, they operate with complete visibility, not just at the top of the funnel, right? The top of the funnel is where your new patients come in the door, right? We're all hanging on for that, right? But it really is all the way through treatment, right? It's getting them scheduled. It's having them accept treatment. And then, of course, retention, right? That big beast that we all talk about, right? Retention, how to stay on top of that retention, because that's where your recurring revenue is, right? When you track every single stage of performance, from how patients find you to how they convert and how they return, you actually stop guessing what works, right? You know which procedures generate the most value. You know which marketing channels drive real production. And importantly, right, where time and money are being wasted. And we all know that is something that we all do. We all waste time and money, right?
Absolutely, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, so you want to try to minimize that. And then that starts with the measurement, right? So that visibility, right? The second thing is alignment. And this is what I talked about with Dr. Sammy and Dr. Joe's story, because what allowed them to be successful is they really united the team around that singular goal, profit. It's not a bad word, doctor. It is not a bad word. You, me, we all get up in the morning, go to our jobs to earn money, right? And we want to earn the most money for our skill sets, right? And be able to deliver the kind of services that we want to live, right? So your marketing, when you look at where are all these different, team members, right? So you have your marketing people, your team members who are thinking about wanting more leads, right? I want more leads. The front desk, we need more patient calls. Your operations director, your office managers, everybody wants smoother scheduling, right? Finance, right? Your accountant's always talking about predictable cash flow, right? And that's all important stuff, but no one's metrics are typically connected, right? These high performing practices eliminate that divide. They align every function around the same objective, and that's profitability, right? You put KPIs in place, then those KPIs connect that patient flow and production back to every team member, right? We know what's happening from the front desk to to the doctor, we see how it all works, right?
This is interesting too, this particular topic, because culture has been a top line piece since 2020. And every metric that's come out of this when it comes to team retention and attracting great team members, they want to feel valued, and they also want to feel like there's a purpose. So if they're just like schlepping to work every day and just kind of doing the same thing and not evolving and not learning and not challenging themselves, that's where you're losing team
Absolutely.
members. And
Yeah.
you're really just attracting those those time to make the donuts type people.
Right, exactly.
But if you want to make a change and you want to really prioritize profitability and systems and management, this is where you're going to attract the best team.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it starts at the top, right? It absolutely starts at the top. It starts at the owner's decision to take control and then set some goals and align the team, bring them in, and have life be exciting again, right? And I've seen this over and over and over again, and we've seen it play out in so many different ways when economies are bad, when economies are good. When economies are bad, there are still many, many businesses that do very well and grow during those times. And they grow because they don't give up and they just start looking at what can they do differently. And sometimes it's a shot in the dark, right? And I would say, a quiet pitch for what I'm doing here with you today is that most dental practices are living in a silo, right? We don't have the skill sets, and then we have to go find people to help us, and we don't even know where to start. This is what we do, right? We have systems in place, and like Sammy and Joe, they didn't know how to do it, but we gave them the systems. We taught them how to do it, and all we ask from them is that you just implement at least 90% of the things we ask you to implement, and just trust us, right? Just trust us, it'll work. Think about how you talk to your patients about when they need some big dental treatment. They have to work, but they have to show up for their appointments. They have to take your recommendations. They have to be where they need to be. They have to take care of their teeth in the way it's all the same thing, right? How committed are you? You're going to make this a big investment in your health. How committed are you? We're a team. You got to do it with me, right? And then the last thing is adaptability. And again, this plays into, Ray, what I just, like when things are bad, do we just retreat and wait for it to get better? No, right? Those successful practices are adaptable, right? They continually measure and learn. Sometimes you're going to do things that don't pan out. That's okay, right? You learn from that. We look at the things that work and we move on them, right? So we look at the data. The market's going to shift. The patient demands are going to shift. Your strategy is also going to shift, and that is okay. You don't have to be locked in. But first, it starts with getting the right analytics in place so you can actually test, refine, and reinvest your time, your energy, your money intelligently. And that allows you to compound your results, right? And when you're able to look at all these things, you talk about team and culture, right? Pam, nobody leaves you for $1 an hour, right? Do they?
No.
They leave you because they're miserable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And somebody else is offering them hope, right? They're like a shiny penny. So if they're skilled, they know your patients. If your patients love them, let's take these beautiful people that you have in your practice and have them feel like they're part of something bigger. And that's when all three of these things work together. It really does pave the way for predictable and profitable growth. I've seen it over and over again. It's exciting to watch.
Oh my goodness, it really is. And I think that people watching this, they are thinking, okay, this sounds great. And I really want to hit the ground running when as we head into 2026. What are some of the first things they should be looking at?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, I think, a lot of it we really talked about so far, but, here's the top ones, right? You absolutely, number one, need to start looking at your PPO exposure, right? How much profit are you losing in the trap? And I think you have to really own that and say it out loud. When I meet with practice owners, it's always, this conversation is always shocking to me. I'll ask them what their production is and what their collections are. And I often hear a very common number. It's interesting, across the country, solo provider practices all across this country, they tell me that their collections, they always tell me their collections numbers first, right? Because that's what we live in. 750K. I hear that number almost every day of the week, which is not a big number. I'm like, okay, well, how much is your production? Like, what are you writing off? And on average, I'm hearing 1.2 to 1.4. So we're talking about, writing off 30 to 40% of the work that you do. $500,000 is not surprising. And it's interesting. I'll say to the doctor, I'll say, so Dr. Pam, you are writing off $500,000. How does that make you feel?
Angry,
Right?
resentful, tired.
So I don't know that anybody is having these conversations with them sometimes, because when I make them say the words out loud, it's like a light bulb goes off in their head, and it confirms every emotion that they've had around their career, right? So you have to look at that. It's like stepping on the scale for me, my whole life. It's like, oh, we're away for the weekend. I need to check that. I don't want to step on the scale. I don't want to see it, right? But you have to know, right? The other thing is, you have capacity constraints, right? And if you want to do something different, right, but you can't, meaning you're so booked with those PPO patients that you don't have room for the kinds of treatment you want to do, then it's time to make a change, right? You have to clear those bottlenecks in your practice. If you're in that position, you're in the best position to start exiting, because you have a large volume of patients. You don't want to bring on another hygienist. You don't want to bring on another doctor, another assistant. You want to be more efficient. You want to keep more of the money you work really hard for. Another area we see is, some practices, wisely make new patient blocks. So there's opportunities. But again, this comes under alignment. Things get busy, those PPO patients call, and they get those new patient blocks. Right? Because why? Because the doctor's yelling at them, fill the schedule, right? So you have to protect those, right? As you're doing this process, you have to be mindful of what kinds of patients you want to put in those new patient blocks, right? And then prioritizing, retention alone is all by itself. So your recare, you have to be even strategic there, right? You want to make sure that you're keeping the high value patients. So when you have an opening in your schedule, you want to look at, well, which patients am I going to call, right? Am I going to call the patients that their insurance pays me $12 for a prophy visit? Or am I going to call a fee-for-service patient who I know has been waiting? Well, you have to know who you're calling, right? There are tools, there's strategies. We have lots of systems in place where you're able to use the data that's within your practice to filter out who you want to see in your practice, and making sure those great patients are coming into your practice.
Those are really interesting points. And I think a lot of us listening are thinking, okay, that's taking notes. We need to do that. But I think there's more, and there's obviously ways to help get these systems in place in an efficient and a streamlined manner as well. But sadly, we're kind of running low on time. So let me steal some final thoughts from you.
Yeah. I guess, if I have to really impart you with anything, I want to make sure that you don't have to feel like you have to overhaul the whole practice, right? That you're just like, and it can be overwhelming, right? How do I do all these things? How do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time, right? But you need to start looking at those metrics and make good, positive changes along the way. None of this is going to happen overnight. Give yourself 2 years. right? If you're committed to it, give yourself 2 years. Maybe it'll happen sooner, like it did with Dr. Sammy Joe, but kind of be in that with the plan, but knowing as you're measuring, you'll be able to do those things in a manageable way, right? Focus on those high value patients, delivering that high value care, and then prioritize from there. So that's really all, all I can say to that. So hopefully that helps you. And anybody who wants to, we are going to send a follow-up email to everybody. So I think there might be a button on the side here if you wanted to schedule and have a conversation with me or my colleagues Duke and John. I mean, we're happy to get on a call with you and kind of dig a little bit deeper with you and see if this is something that you're ready for. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody out there.
Thank you so much. I was going to say, how can we work with you and how can we, this is the best time of year to do it, right? We're heading into the new year. I think that we think about New Year's resolutions. The only ones that work are the ones that you're consistent with. And I think having an accountability coach, regardless of what you're trying to do, is something that's going to help you be set up for success.
Absolutely. Yep. Thanks for having me, Pam. This was fun to have this conversation with you, and I'm wishing everybody a great holiday and start thinking ahead. Let's make 2026 really great.
Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next year.
Bye.